Welcome to A State of Mind, the podcast that brings together consciousness, meditation, mindfulness, psychology, psychedelics, and so much more in pursuit of this mystery we call life. This is Julian Royce. And hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. Let's see. If you've been appreciating this show, please consider making a donation at patreon.com/A State of Mind. Also want to mention we have these gorgeous t-shirts for sale. Every time I wear them, I get a compliment on them. Send us a message if you want one, or visit astateofmindplay.com. So in today's episode, I'm speaking with Olivia Sophie Franzen. Olivia recently graduated with a master's in religious studies from Naropa University, which is a small, unusual, kind of weird school here in Boulder, Colorado. It's also where I went to school. I actually have the same degree that she has. I think I graduated about 9-10 years ago. And I love geeking out on yoga, Buddhism, these kinds of topics. So this conversation was a lot of fun for me. Olivia did her final thesis project on the so-called Tibetan Book of the Dead and these Bardo teachings, which refer to teachings about the dying process and the stages of death and rebirth you go through. It can also be applied to any transition in your life. Moment by moment, things are changing. If you move somewhere, there's these kinds of stages of transition or change or Bardo, and then there's a new experience on the other end. And actually, it never stops. You can if you really look at it closely, it's like a fractal. You could go down to the millisecond with it, the micro moment, where things are always changing. So we're always in these Bardos, we're always in these transitions, and there isn't really any place that you ever really reach with it. It just keeps going and going. I guess you could debate that last point, but that's my opinion at the moment. So we talk about this a little bit. We talk about meanings of self and selflessness in the Buddhist teachings and in psychology. Olivia shares with us about early Christianity and the possibility that Jesus may have been to India. Who knows? We talk about Tantra and the importance of honoring our own lived, embodied experience. And we discuss the Dakinis, which are in Indian and Buddhist traditions, these kind of feminine wisdom beings. So that was interesting to discuss, and the different meanings that this word Dakini can have. And then we discuss issues of pluralism, inclusivity, and universality in religious studies in general, in spirituality. And we discuss a little bit this interesting phenomena of being, quote, spiritual but not religious. This is obviously a big topic, and it's one likely relevant to many listeners of this podcast, myself included. I think in today's world, where we have access to so much knowledge and information and awareness of so many different cultures and different religions and philosophies, it makes sense to have this kind of attitude. And I think it's at least potentially a very honest position to take. Interestingly, however, there are psychological studies showing an increased chance of depression, anxiety, and other kind of mental health issues amongst those who identify as being spiritual but not religious. And I'm going to link some of these studies in the show notes, but just a few quick thoughts on it. First of all, I noticed there's not a consensus definition of what spirituality means in these studies, and it's obviously difficult to study this kind of thing. We can't study it with the precision we would get in something like, say, physics. And I wonder if some of these issues are arising because there's less certainty and more groundlessness in not identifying with a particular tradition. In that case, it takes a real bravery to question things and to think critically for yourself. On the other hand, studies like these generally show positive psychological effects for being religious. A lot of these benefits come from having a community. And especially if you're, part of a community that is doing things like charity work, caring for the poor. And there's also benefits in having an attachment to a God you perceive as loving. And many spiritual but not religious people may lack a community and may lack that kind of attachment to a God figure they may or may not believe in. And there's also a risk of increased narcissism and self-centeredness when we get really involved in spirituality, divorced from community engagement. So I think that is part of the shadow side of this spiritual but not religious movement. In any case, it's growing tremendously. 33% of people in the United States identify that way. And I believe among millennials, it's something closer to 70%. So it's definitely a growing thing. And I think for good reasons overall. But it's interesting to consider some of these issues that it raises. Okay. And I'm going to now very non-ironically shift gears to something that I suppose sounds, I don't know, spiritual, but not particularly religious. Because as listeners of this podcast know, I'm a big proponent of mindfulness and meditation. There's a lot of benefit that can come from that. And I just wanted to share, before we started recording this conversation, Olivia and I kind of very naturally sat in silence for a few moments. And I really appreciated getting to share that space with her. And then at the very end of our conversation, I asked her if she had any last words to say. Again, there was this rather pregnant pause. And I just appreciated being able to share silence with another human. And I think it's something that, that we could find throughout our day. It could be with another person, it could be with nature, or just with yourself, where there's a moment of silence, a pause, in conversation or in your own thoughts even, and to open up and appreciate that space rather than cover it up or run away from it. There can be a lot of value in that. And I actually want to be open to that more in my own life. That in talking with people, the space between the words can be just as potent and powerful as the words themselves. So, without further ado, I bring you a fellow traveler on the path to the here and now, Olivia. And I'm here today with Olivia. Olivia, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Julian.
Yeah. And you just recently graduated with a master's degree in religious studies, right?
I did, yeah. I ended up focusing mostly on Indo-Tibetan studies as well, but I didn't actually apply with that concentration. I applied with the contemplative religious studies concentration, which I thought would be kind of like a comparative religious studies degree.
Yeah.
But Naropa has a way of making you a Buddhist. No, it
See
was...
how long that lasts.
Yeah.
So you went to Naropa, which is named after, a Buddhist master or saint. I don't think the word saint really works in that context.
Siddha, Mahasiddha.
Yeah. And it sounds like you got drawn more in that direction. But what was your original inspiration for going there? Because it's kind of an unusual thing to study, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I did the same program, and there was 5 other people when I graduated in my class with me.
Yeah.
It was very small.
Yeah, the department was pretty small as well. And I was part of the last graduating class of an actual cohort. They're moving the whole program online.
Oh, really?
So that was kind of a...
Wow.
Between finding that out...
Just for coronavirus?
I believe forever. I think that was their plan even before the pandemic started.
Yeah. For me, it made sense to get that degree because I was so interested in Tibetan Buddhism. And I was drawn to it because, at least when I was there, it was based on the traditional Kagyu, which is a school of Tibetan Buddhism. Their monastic curriculum, their philosophical study, and there's a certain sequence in which you learn things. And and that appealed to me. But it is like a rare thing, and it doesn't have, it doesn't lead to a lot of clear job opportunities, or, I would say I did it more for my own personal path and understanding and exploring the possibility of getting a PhD and being in that world of academia. And ended up going a different route, at least for now. But were you kind of wanting to deepen your own practice? Was that your inspiration?
Yeah, I would say similar to you, it was also more of a personal pursuit than a clear career path. It really, I would say it started with my love of Alan Watts and his kind of introducing me to the whole field of comparative religious studies and the way in which he discusses the mysticism of Christianity and Zen Buddhism and Hindu yoga, and kind of synthesizes in ways that are kind of pulling out the pearls and arguably some similarities and differences between these traditions. And I was in Thailand 3 years ago, and I was doing a meditation retreat there in the style of Hridaya, which is a kind of a heart-based, open-eyed, actually mostly close-eyed meditation, but the meditation facilitator, instructor, his kind of nightly Dharma talks were pulling from like these mystical truths and mystical teachings of all these different traditions. And that kind of reawoken and re-inspired my my love for studying wisdom traditions and really studying religion. And so that was really what led me to apply to the program at Naropa.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how the world we live in today, we have access to all these different traditions, all these different practices, philosophies, whereas in the past you would kind of be limited to your geographic area in terms of what understandings or, teachings you would be exposed to. And there's actually some interesting, so that's led to this amazing plurality. We know all these different traditions, but there's been some interesting research recently that I've seen that shows that people that are really interested in spirituality and not rooted in a particular path can actually have higher levels of anxiety and stress. And I think that's because it is confusing and overwhelming to be exposed to so much information all the time. We're in the age of information. And at the same time, it doesn't feel like, for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, it's not honest to ignore that. And it's not, you can't I don't want to be a fundamentalist about things. You don't want to just have the attitude of my way is the right way. But I think in the past, there was more kind of safety and security in just following the given path. And today in our world, for most of us, most intelligent people, that's not there anymore.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. At Naropa, we studied a lot of kind of this spiritual but not religious phenomenon that's going on, of people don't really, it's like religion has it's like it has a negative connotation with it now, and most people of my generation, I feel like, don't really want to even identify as religious, and yet they have no issue with considering themselves spiritual or having spiritual practice. And it's like, to what point is that just semantics, really? But I think a big part of it is it tends to be people who maybe aren't deeply aligned or devoted to a specific tradition the way you would with a religious identity. They're kind of pulling from this or pulling from that or whatever it is. And the last few years, I've really been humbled to try to understand, what was Chogyam Trungpa talking about with spiritual materialism, and how do you approach a tradition that's different than your ancestral lineage with integrity? And is there a way to do that and still not fully align? Is there a way to do that with Buddhism and not take refuge?
Oh, interesting.
Right.
So just for people listening, taking refuge is kind of the formal way to enter and become a Buddhist, which I personally have done many times. But I understand not wanting to, or I understand people who would go through a ceremony like that and still not want to call themselves a quote-unquote Buddhist. There's a saying that's become, I've heard from multiple people now, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist,
Right.
And the
Jesus
Buddha,
wasn't a Christian.
Jesus, right. So it's a big topic. And actually in Buddhism, there's like so many different teachings and practices, and the idea is that you find the ones that work for you in a given moment. And if you had a skilled teacher you were working with, they would be able to help you in a way that was actually genuine and would kind of point you in the right direction. But this idea of spiritual materialism from Chogyam Trungpa was such an insightful thing to name, where you're kind of trying to make a new identity. That's how I would probably talk about it. You're trying to make a new identity out of your spiritual practice.
Like an egoic identity.
And like hold on to it and present yourself in a certain way and build up this, new sense of self instead of seeing through the sense of self.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if that is still maybe a useful tool along the path. Like that's not the ultimate goal, but I think that there could be some use in cultivating an identity.
Right.
I mean, that kind of gets into, one of my biggest struggles with my studies of Buddhism that I was so triggered by for so long was really even this notion of no self. And it wasn't until like my very last semester last spring that I feel like I finally started to understand where that was coming from. But it feels like there's no discussion of what a healthy egoic identity looks like, or the importance of that, the way in which modern psychology might.
Totally.
I'm curious if you've studied that at all in your later degrees of like, they have such a strong stance on any notion of self, fixed identity, or ego, but in order to like function in this world, like I feel like we have to actually befriend our ego and have a healthy relationship with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question and a good point. And it's something I have thought a lot about. I wrote a paper about no self in the Buddhist tradition when I was.
Me too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and so I think you're absolutely right. Like in the traditional Buddhist teachings, there's a lot of talk of like cutting through the self. It's a complicated. All these things we're talking about like have a lot of nuances and complexities, and so it's partly becomes a game of semantics. How do we define these things? How do we understand what the term self is? So traditionally in Buddhism,
anatta.
Yeah, anatta.
Anatta.
There's the idea that the self, traditionally in Buddhism, is something that's solid, permanent, unchanging, and existing independently of other things. And so if we understand that everything is changing and impermanent, and that everything is connected and dependent upon everything else, and that everything that we can look at, any phenomena we can look at, is made up of smaller pieces. Mm-hmm. So you can break everything down. So it's this deconstructionist approach.
Yeah.
And it was, let's see, the idea is to like let go and relax, really, I think is part of it. So that would be the first turning of the Buddhist teaching. The second turning was all about, emptiness and compassion. And then the third turning, as you know, because you got to study this, like the Buddha taught about true self or Buddha nature, which is something that is permanent, something that is unchanging, something that does exist in some sense independently of causes and conditions of circumstances.
Like, wait a second, I thought there was nothing permanent.
Right. But we can at least we can understand that all these teachings are skillful means to help us evolve, develop, to grow in compassion and wisdom. And we can't hold on to a self, and we also can't hold on to this idea of no self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I was really studying the no self too, it became clear to me that even, anatta coming from anatman was like a clear reaction to atman.
Right.
Like this Hindu eternal soul coming out of Advaita Vedanta. And so I wonder how much of it, I know there was a lot of debates within different Buddhist schools and the Brahman schools in India, and how much of this seems like in that initial wave was just a clear reaction to saying, we are not, what do they call, like eternalists.
We're not eternalists.
We're not Atman.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever, I forget what they called. They just kind of call them like the Brahmans, really, a lot of the time. But it's like...
Yeah, so radical at that time. And so, I think you're absolutely right. It was the Buddha taught no self to overcome this idea of the eternal soul.
But then it's like if you go all the way to the third turning again, it's like, are there ways in which the Advaita Vedanta understanding of Atman and Buddha nature, are there ways in which that could actually be pointing to the same thing, you know? Like,
Yeah.
do all the rivers finally flow to the ocean? Like, this is the great debate, which was such a contentious topic in the wisdom traditions department at Naropa, and was far more controversial than I ever would have expected.
Oh, yeah.
You know, kind of this...
People really care about it, and they're arguing and debating, and I think that can be healthy.
It can be healthy. I also feel like pretty much almost all of my professors felt like there was kind of a bad taste in their mouth about inclusivism, or any understanding of like perennial philosophy or an inclusivist stance. They kind of had like a healthy pluralism, but it was like Buddha Dharma is Buddha Dharma. Like, don't try to like tell me that, you know, something else is, that they're all, it's like, are all the paths going up to the same peak of the mountain, or are there actually just many peaks on many mountains and many paths? And it's
a great question. I 100% know exactly what you're talking about, and there's a few different threads here. One thing is people who are, what I saw, like people who are really studying Buddhism, and they're Buddhists themselves, even if they don't want to admit it, and they're in academia and they're teaching at a place like Naropa. Like, the Buddhist tradition has this long history of refuting and arguing against the Hindu schools. And so there's all these kind of pre-canned answers from these other philosophers or masters, as they're called in the Buddhist tradition. And so they would say, no, Buddha nature is nothing like nothing like Atman. It's completely different, and you'd be an idiot if you thought that. And so that attitude kind of carries through into people who study it, scholarly, I think, and so I kind of ran into trouble too, because when I would look at like the Upanishads with an open mind, like, wow, this sounds exactly like the Buddha nature teachings. I see very little difference at all. So I tend to the more inclusivity and to understanding that different people had, similar experiences and realizations and expressed them with different words and languages and in different traditions. And I think that there's a lot in common. But the other thing that's happening in academia is inclusivity and like making claims about making universalist claims at all is become kind of taboo,
right?
Because in like postmodernism, it's like all about deconstructing things, and it's all about we have this idea of cultural appropriation. So if I make a claim like all religions are trying to get to this point, and this is like an ultimate truth that everyone can realize, the postmodernists come along and say, well, you don't know what these other people's experience are. You don't know what their reality is, and you can't speak for them. And it's kind of wrong for you to try to speak for these other people.
Yeah.
And then you add on like colonialism and all that white supremacy and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so that complicates things. And that's had such a huge, continuing influence in the academic world that it's, I think that becomes its own extreme. I think there are things we can generally say about religion in general that are valid and true. So.
Yeah, I think there's a middle way. I totally understand, the horrible history of Orientalism and, this lack of just no understanding of identity politics or cultural relativism or all these things. But I also, if you just like read any mystical text from all these different traditions, it just feels so much more inclusive and open than some of the more like exoteric expressions of those traditions are trying to say. I mean, I learned a couple years ago that there are people somewhere in India who it's like both Hindu schools and Islamic schools, and they're living together, and in their kirtans, they're chanting to Krishna, and then they're chanting to Allah, and like there's no issue. Like they have this understanding.
I have a great story that kind of relates to that. When I was studying abroad in India, I visited Sikkim, which is like right on the Himalaya mountains. And so there's a lot of Tibetan influence there. And I stayed at this little inn, and the innkeeper, I was like asking them about, are you Buddhist or are you Hindu? And they're like, oh, I'm Hindu, and on their altar they had a picture of Jesus, and they had a picture of Buddha, and they had a picture of Krishna, and all this stuff. And then these they were telling me these missionaries had come and told them about Jesus and were trying to convert them. And their little boy had taken a picture of Jesus and just put it on their altar, and so that's how they had. And I thought that was so beautiful. But the missionaries were then kind of angry at them. They're like, "No, you shouldn't be doing that."
Yeah.
You know, they want them to have to choose just Christianity or just Hinduism.
Right.
And I think you're right. Like, I think in India, it's a very inclusive culture. I think that's part of Indian culture.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even their huge pantheon of all of these like devas, and there's so many different traditions, but there's like some choose to just work with a certain deity, and others it's like they're pulling from different things. Yeah. And I've heard that some places in India, Jesus is understood as an avatar of Krishna. So I feel like that's a perfect example of inclusivism. They're like, sure, we have no issue. Like, this is a Mahasiddha. Like, this was a great saint. And, like, we see him through our lens of understanding that he was an avatar of Krishna. Mm-hmm. And who am I to tell them that's wrong? Who knows? Yeah. There's actually a lot of interesting evidence arguing, these kind of lost years of Jesus, or I like to call him Yeshua, believing that he did spend time in the East, and he spent time in India, and he studied yoga. He studied yoga in the Tantra and the Bhakta, and really what he was preaching could be seen as an expression of Bhakti yoga, just that really heart-centered devotion. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot, like...
What kind of archaeological evidence have you seen? Like, I've heard stories that, like, there's, like, the lost years of Jesus' life.
Someone does claim that they have the actual burial cemetery of Jesus somewhere in India.
Oh, a burial cemetery? Mm-hmm. Like, he was buried there?
Yeah, that is actually... I didn't hear that right.
Wow. And isn't there an ancient Jewish community in India?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think right there, like, if you... What would it be? The East Coast or whatever of India. Like, if you took a boat from the Middle East, like, kind of the first place you would reach in India, there's, like, an ancient Jewish community.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So it's certainly possible. And certainly possible that back in the ancient world, ideas were traveling around more than we realize.
Yeah.
There is evidence of Buddhism reaching ancient Greece, and also ancient Greek ideas reaching India through Alexander the Great, and all that. So.
And I think also that Israel was a huge cultural center and crossing point between the East and the West. And so that would have been a huge diverse melting pot. So even if Jesus didn't go to India, it's very possible that he was introduced to these practices and traditions just even in Israel.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally believe that that's possible. And it also seems like we don't really know what Jesus was really teaching. I mean, we have the Gospels, and what is it? The Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus is making much more claims about nature. Like, he says something like, if you find a rock or a tree, you'll find me also. And there was much more mystical, and it had more of a practice element to it. And so the whole history of Christianity, and it's being adopted by the Romans, and then all the governments in Europe, and I mean, it became an instrument of the state in a way to a political force as much as a religious one. So,
and I mean, the same thing has happened in Buddhism as well. I mean, Tibetan Buddhism is the perfect example of. It was kind of shocking to realize how patriarchal and how much it was just a state religion and a way of a feudal state religion and a way of controlling people, and at the same time, has some of the most precious pearls of wisdom within these different schools. But I think the way that it was being expressed on a wider scale, the more I learned about the history of Tibet, it's not like, I think we have this Orientalist fantasy that they're all just like getting enlightened in these monasteries, but it was much more pragmatic than that. Like, there's actually very few who are really going deep into Dzogchen or any of the really serious meditation traditions.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think there were a few people who really applied themselves to meditation, and most people, I mean, in Tibet, a lot of families would be pressured, or it would be the societal norm to give a child or two to a monastery.
Yeah.
And so those children weren't making an adult choice to pursue a religious life. They were being put in this institution at a young age, and it would be honorable for them to stay there. I mean, it's changing now with the modern world. They have more of a choice to leave. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think for sure it's a state religion. And it's sad that to see Buddhist groups here in America or in Europe today who are kind of perpetuating that feudal dynamic. And I think that's where some of the abuses, for sure, that's where some of the abuses come out of. Because it creates a system with the guru or the lama at the top. Everyone is underneath them. Their word is basically the word of God, and there's obviously a lot of potential for abuse in that kind of dynamic. And it doesn't really fit with their culture, and it's not really necessary. We don't need to try to recreate Tibet politically here.
Yeah.
And going to Naropa, I mean, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was kind of trying to do that. He was trying to create his own country, and he actually moved people to Nova Scotia, Canada, right before he died, with the idea that he would create an independent country there.
Really?
So there's a weird kind of dark and kind of shadow history behind Naropa and Shambhala. yeah, he like literally did that. He created his own army. He made his own uniforms.
But they were like peaceful warriors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they're supposed to, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I think Trungpa Rinpoche creating the army is called the Kusang, is partly because Tibet didn't really have much of an army, and they got overrun by China, and that's a continuing atrocity. It's a continuing Holocaust. It's still happening now, and so that kind of makes sense, actually, if you understand the history that he was coming from.
Yeah. God, there's so much to say, but like when you were just even talking about this more shadowy side of Shambhala, or it's interesting because I feel like Tibetan Buddhism in itself is actually very shadowy, and the tantric path is inherently very shadowy. And as much as the earlier schools of Buddhism tried to like reject and react against these non-Buddhist Indian traditions, like Tibetan Buddhism appropriated so much from Hindu Tantra. Like, it's really not...
Yeah, that's another great point.
It's really not even arguable. As much as some people might try to argue. Like, I talked to Sarah Harding. She wrote this great book on Niguma. She's a great translator, used to be a professor at Naropa. And she said she has literally seen the texts that they still use the words Shiva instead of changing it to Chakra Samvara. Like,
Chakra Samvara being the Buddhist deity and Shiva being the Hindu deity.
Yeah. Or, Shakti and Vajrayogini. Like, they literally, it was a Buddhist scroll, but it still said Shiva. And I feel like that's the ancient scandal in Buddhism. It's so obvious to me. I had I got to study Hindu Tantra with Ben Williams. Oh, yeah. And then study Vajrayana. So Ben Williams was on the podcast last spring. Yeah. Yeah, he's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's awesome. Well, that's a great example of an appropriation. And it's not necessarily, I'm not using that word negatively. It's what human beings do for tens of thousands of years. As long as there's been humans, there's been cultures, and they borrow from one another, they learn from one another, they affect one another, they influence one another. And so I'm not a fan of the politically correct, like trying to criticize any kind of appropriation. I mean, it can be done in a way that's disrespectful. Yeah. It can be done with the kind of supremacist viewpoint. But arguably the Buddhists were doing that to the Hindus. They thought they were superior to them, and they could take this spiritual technology and kind of reappropriate it. I think so. It's a complicated picture. Yeah, I think you can do it respectfully too. I think that this is a perfect example of it being done very respectfully. I think that the way that Tantra was embedded into Buddhism in Tibet kind of brings the best of both worlds, because it's bringing like this really powerful grounding of compassion into the tantric path, which is not necessarily there. Right, that's what the Buddhists could contribute.
right?
Exactly.
The compassion piece. Yeah. And I've talked to people who've gone down the road of more traditional Hinduism, Americans, and they said that, like, and now, I mean, this one person I know in particular is now a Buddhist, and that's what they said. They're like, I realized that how important compassion is, and that actually wasn't being taught or emphasized in this more tantric Hindu tradition, because the understanding of karma is so strong that if you see someone who's homeless, if you see someone who has cancer, that's their karma, and that really bothered them. And I mean, Buddhists have the idea of karma too, but we also have the tremendous emphasis on compassion. But I want to say one other thing. This idea of like Chakrasamvara and Shiva and the tantras and how connected they were. I think that back in the day, in Tibet and India, there were these great masters, and they would realize, they received these practices, they practiced them, they realized them, and they understood that it didn't matter that much if it was Hindu or Buddhist, and so they could change the name. Because in Buddhism we have many different Buddhas and different practices, and you can change you can change the deity you're practicing, you can change the Buddha you're practicing. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's partly how it happened. I mean, I don't think they were like intentionally stealing them.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not like this happened in Tibet. I mean, this happened in India. Yeah. All of the Mahasiddhas who founded most of the Tibetan lineages were Indian yogis.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's interesting. I mean, people like, Tilopa, the teacher of Naropa, like, he was a Buddhist tantric practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's interesting that there were like so many different strands of Tantra within India.
And I think the influence went both ways. They were all influencing each other.
Yeah. One thing I think is really beautiful is how the understanding of the Dakinis evolved in Tibet. I mean, the Dakinis in India, they were at the burial grounds, and they were like this fierce kind of demonic, witchy, deva, whatever things.
Like a feminine spiritual energy, but I think maybe originally they were like almost like they flew through the air.
Yeah. And they were like eating dead bodies, and like they were pretty terrifying.
I remember Sarah Hardy at Naropa, one of our professors, said they would sound like vampires. They would fly through the air, they would eat dead bodies, they would hang out in the burial grounds, the charnel grounds. And
it does seem like in Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of the Dakinis kind of like chilled out a little bit. And there was like this whole, all the mythology with Padmasambhava and kind of like conquering, but also kind of like making the Dakinis protectors of the Dharma, and making the land deities of Tibet protectors of the Dharma, that were kind of this fierce, almost demonic forces that were then kind of converted to being. And that was really hard for me to swallow at first, the way that it's expressed. I'm like, whoa. Like, how is that any different from, the intense crusades, right? Or the Christian conversion, or spreading the gospel, or we're going to convert you, we're going to save you. Like, it kind of felt like a similar energy reading the stories of what Padmasambhava did, and yet he's seen as a hero and he's celebrated. And I'm not here to like have a strong stance or be like highly critical of either side. I think it's just interesting to understand what's going on, to understand that Buddhism wasn't always in Tibet, and that things happened and things continue to shift, and it continues to shift. We don't live...
It's a living tradition.
It's a living tradition.
Absolutely.
They're all living traditions. Like, they're not static, they're not monolithic. So even when we try to fixate and say this is tradition and this is blasphemy or whatever it is, it's like, I think it's all far more of a gray area.
Yeah.
But I understand that I think the insecurity comes from what's in integrity and what's not with your teaching or your expression of continuing on this tradition. Like, what's okay and what's not okay in terms of
it's such a rich
evolution
question.
And innovation.
It's like a koan. It's like something we sit with, something we struggle with. I don't think there's... What I've come to reject are black and white, clear-cut answers to pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And I appreciate people who are engaging in these traditions to carry them forward in a traditional way. And then I also appreciate people, like one of my teachers, Reggie Ray, who are very steeped in the traditions, and then they make innovations. They do something new. They're doing it in an informed way, and from their point of view, I believe they're doing it in a way that's an integrity, where like they're carrying the essence forward.
Yeah.
And the essence takes on new forms. The essence takes on new manifestations.
Yeah. I did a retreat at Dharma Ocean at the Crestone Center last year before it closed down, and I felt like it did a really good job of holding on to that essence, doing a little bit of the traditional ritual, while also being so innovative in how these practices were being taught, and this just kind of more open somatic awareness that anyone could benefit from.
Right. Yeah.
Buddhist or not.
Right. And the whole Buddhist thing is supposed to be how to help people, how to help reduce suffering. Like that's like the fundamental question to keep returning to, I think. But to go back to the Dakinis, I have a friend I was talking to the other day, and he's like a very dedicated, serious tantric Buddhist practitioner. He's done a lot of different retreats very traditionally. He takes the ritual very seriously, and he told me he thinks the Dakinis were aliens that came from another planet or another dimension, and that the leader of the Sakya school actually said like jokes about that, or
really
said something about that. And I thought that was interesting. The word Dakini in Tibetan literally means Skywalker.
Yeah.
And so
Dakini.
Dakini, yeah.
In case Judith Simmer Brown is listening, let's say it correctly. Dakini.
Yeah, and so Skywalker, and so that's one cool way to think about it, I think, that I've started to open up to. Maybe, however we understand it, some kind of being separate than the normal human came down, and in Hinduism in India, but all across the world, all religious traditions, they have stories of like celestial beings coming from the sky, imparting some kind of teaching or wisdom, and then some kind of religion comes up out of it.
Yeah.
And maybe this is an example of that. But the other thing I was thinking about is Buddhism has this amazing tendency to, like, there's a big distinction in Buddhism between wisdom and like worldly.
Yeah.
And so like there's a difference between wisdom Dakinis, who are enlightened, awakened expressions of energy, maybe feminine energy. There's also Dakas, which are the male version. And then there might be non-awakened Dakinis, and maybe they are kind of like vampire monsters that could come and suck your blood and eat dead bodies. And that's like, I think part of the magic and power of the Buddhist tradition as it's spread throughout the world is to engage in different realities, different cultures, different understandings, and to offer like a more awakened, a more enlightened version of that same thing. So like when Buddhism went to Japan, there was Shintoism, there were all these different spirits, and then like Zen Buddhism starts to develop out of that.
It is interesting. I mean, even with all of these wrathful deities in Tibetan Buddhism, like if you don't understand what's going on, you might be like, whoa, like this is Satanism or, demonic. Like, I mean, some of these,
some of it literally looks exactly like the demonic spirit worship. And so
the pitchfork tongues and the skulls and the crazy eyes and just like the most terrifying images, really, that you could imagine. And these are compassionate, enlightened, awakened beings.
That's the beauty and magic of Tantra, Buddhist Tantra. Yeah. So I think in Tibet, there was really scary, animistic, kind of demon devil practices. There's probably also like light and happy practices too, but there was things like animal sacrifice. There were things like invoking these wrathful mountain spirits. And so then the Buddhist story is that those same energies can become awakened expressions of compassion and wisdom. Right. And in our own selves, our own being, like we have anger, we have these like desires, like someone cuts you off in traffic and all of a sudden you want to kill them. Like where did that come from? And so like in the Tantra, it's like about like letting that energy flow through in awareness and in an awakened way, rather than being like, oh, that's bad, that's wrong, let's like tamp that down, let's repress that, or let's practice for 1,000 years so I never get angry again. That's not the tantric understanding. Yeah. No, and I think it's really helpful to understand there's a difference between fully allowing yourself to feel that anger or feel that grief versus the story you create about it, the ways in which you cycle it and don't let yourself get out of it. Like, I think that is really what's not beneficial, is all the stories and the ways that we get stuck. And the irony is,
if you just fully let yourself in a safe way, you know, at specific times, like feel whatever emotion it is, it will pass through you so much faster. And you will really start to recognize that that is not you. It is an energy that's passing through you. And you don't need to create a story or an opinion about it, you know? And totally. Really recognize that, I mean, another thing, obviously, about Tantra that's so interesting is their whole relationship with sexuality and sexual power and sexual energy, you know, and just really recognizing that it's just life force and it's creative energy. And and really like, just all the things that like First Turning tries to reject, right? And be like, passion is bad. Like, we're trying to get away from that. Right. We want to be equanimous. And then in the Tantra, they're like, no, be passionate. Like, you can actually transcend and transmute so much using and harnessing that energy in an awakened, skillful way. And for me personally, I resonate so much more with the Tantric traditions because it feels more all-encompassing. It feels more world-affirming and it feels more celebratory of the human experience and the dynamism of the human experience. Yeah,
absolutely.
For a layperson, for someone who's not trying to be an ascetic or, you know.
Yeah, no, that was well said. I think that there's a lot there. And I think if we judge ourselves too much and we tamp down too much, we lose our life force, you know. And then things are less exciting. You could feel more dead. I mean, there's so much there. Not even sure where to go with it all now. But yeah, this. The other thing I was going to say in talking about the Dakinis, and this gives a sense, I think, of the different like ways language and teachings can be used in the Buddhist tradition. Like, it's like they're different. You could understand the Dakinis as like some kind of being that you could connect with outside of yourself, or you could understand it as like a truth you can discover within. In terms of looking at our own body, like the Dakinis are said to be in the skin, you know? Like you can also like look at the different deities and Buddhas as like being within our own body. And that's something that is a key part of like the Tantric teachings. And I think what it means is not like there's literally some little person, you know, in your big toe or something, but it's like if we, and I think this is what Reggie Ray is pointing us towards when he emphasizes the body. It's like there's these different parts of our body that are obviously all connected. If we really connect with them and feel them and awaken, like that is the deity, that is the Buddha. And they're like the wrathful Buddhas, the peaceful Buddhas, the Dakinis, they're all can be experienced like within our own body.
Within our own bodies and also within our own minds.
Yeah.
You know. Kind of like speaking to like the Bardo teachings of like, you know, in that dying state when all of these wrathful and peaceful deities are coming to you, like the way to wake up is to recognize that it's all manifestations of mind and that they're all awakened expressions of compassion. And I think, you know, I also think that speaks to like the Trikaya, right? And these different like bodies of Buddha, you know, so there's different ways to relate to the Dakini or whatever it is. Like, and that kind of speaks to, I see like, for example, in the Bhakta tradition too, initially it's like, this is a deva, this is the other, it's the, you know, the lover and the beloved, whatever it is, like you are something that I aspire to be, I aspire to commune with. Ultimately, it's merged. Ultimately, it is within you. And I really loved learning about like these different levels of experiencing and even working with the Dakini and with the different bodies of the Buddha. Like sometimes, you know, it's just a mind transmission from the Dakini, and sometimes it's just there's no physical entity experienced. Sometimes it's in a dream, but there's all these different kind of more subtle levels and states of consciousness that they talk about, right? Like with the
Yeah.
Dharmakaya, Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya.
Yeah.
It gets less and less dense in our understanding of self and other.
Right. Yeah. I know you did your thesis project on the Bardo teachings, which is cool to get to see. But yeah, with the three kayas, the three bodies of the Buddha, like one way that could be understood that I don't hear get talked about that much, but it's just like the manifest world, Nirmanakaya, the energetic component, the Sambhogakaya, and then the consciousness, Dharmakaya, or awareness, pure awareness.
Yeah.
Like that's so simple, and then you could just see everything has those three dimensions.
Totally, and how there's like Buddhas in all the dimensions. So
right, yeah.
Like Shakyamuni Buddha was within the Nirmanakaya.
Yeah,
right?
And that was so special. That's kind of very rare, at least in the traditional understanding, to have a fully realized Buddha in the Nirmanakaya realm, who's like the tradition around the Buddha. Like every part of his body was perfectly proportional. He had the special things on his head, the little. So all the
auspicious signs.
Yeah, that's considered to be very rare.
Yeah.
And so.
I went to a monastery in Chiang Mai. I remember, I think they said it was known for having like the wrist bone of Shakyamuni Buddha
cool.
buried within the stupa, and that was very special.
Nice.
I think there's like different pieces of his body in different monasteries, different Buddhist monasteries.
Like the relics and
But I think you could see that for the same with Jesus, right? Like there's Christ consciousness, and there's this finite being who is said to have been a fully realized expression
of God, right? Yeah, I think there's for sure. And then in Christianity we have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It seems similar to the three kayas, but doesn't seem at all exactly the same. And of course people criticize it because it has such a the masculine gender is right there in the Bible.
Yeah.
But again, like what did Jesus actually teach? I don't know that. So.
Well, there's a whole other interesting aspect to that. I learned a lot about it. Cynthia Bourgeau, she's an Episcopalian priest. She wrote Wisdom Jesus, and which she really argues that he was a tantric master, and he was teaching tantric yoga, and she also studied a lot about Mary Magdalene. And there's a lot, because the Catholic Church repressed this so much, it's up until recently, it's been hard to even find information, but there's a lot of evidence showing that Mary Magdalene was not just a disciple, but kind of an equal with Jesus. Actually similar to Padmasambhava and Yeshe Tsogul, which I learned recently. Like, she's seen as a disciple, but they were also, lovers and all these things. But she was a fully realized Buddha.
Right.
She attained full Buddhahood.
Yeah.
And in the same way, Mary Magdalene, attained full awakening. And there are these teachings that talk about them as the co-Christ. Like, they were embodiment of that tantric union of Christ consciousness. And they were really teaching together.
That's beautiful.
And she continued her teachings kind of underground once he was gone. But there's a whole history of way more of the feminine way within Christian mysticism that stayed underground. But
that's cool to hear about. That's there.
I think it was there in the beginning, and it's coming back. And the patriarchy was, I believe, really something that happened after the time of Yeshua. Like, it was something that really happened with the Catholic Church, with the Roman Empire. I think that Paul was very threatened by Mary, and did a lot of things to sabotage her and her teachings.
That's interesting. Makes me think like the written word is itself a more masculine expression, perhaps. And if Paul or these early church fathers, if they were controlling what was written, and then here we are 2,000 years later, that's all we have access to, basically. Right?
The Council of Nicaea, right? They chose this is what these Gospels get to be in the Bible and these don't. How did they decide? What was their agenda for what got into their official Bible and what didn't? We have all these Gospels of Jesus and Mary that didn't make it.
Right.
into the Bible.
Yeah.
They're the founders of the lineage. Like,
it's like what we need is a living tradition that's alive, it's a human to human. It's not just words in a book. It's not just a monastery with walls, or it's not some concrete thing.
yeah.
That's what I think that's what you're pointing to.
I saw, I've seen similar things. I've definitely taken a feminist approach and a feminist critique to the religious studies that I've been doing, and I saw a lot of the same kind of bullshit happening in Buddhism. I mean, even with, everyone knows about Naropa, but nobody knows about Niguma. And I spent a lot of time studying Niguma, and Sarah Harding, Niguma has the 6 yogas. She also was connected with Tilopa. She also founded a lineage in Tibet. And there's a lot of evidence to show that she was actually the older sister of Naropa. She was also attained full Buddhahood. She taught him what he knew. This is what Sarah Harding is positing.
She has a book about that, right?
Yeah. And it's like, amazing. Somehow,
you're absolutely right.
We talk about Naropa. Most of the Mahasiddhas are men, but there's more and more evidence coming out to show that there were a lot of yoginis. There were a lot of female tantric practitioners. But they weren't writing the books. Most of the time, they didn't know how to write. So it is interesting. It's like, who is writing the history? Who is writing?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask. I think if you talk to someone who's really into Tibetan Buddhism, especially if they're more monastic, a fun question could be, who's the first Tibetan person to reach full Buddhahood? Full enlightenment. And it's exactly what you're saying. It was Yeshe Sogyal, the consort, the spiritual consort of Padmasambhava, a tantric practitioner who was not a monastic, and she actually is the one who, according to the tradition, wrote down all Padmasambhava's teachings and buried them all around Tibet so he could find them later. So she's totally his equal in that sense, in terms of realization. I mean, that's what master and disciple really means when it really works. It's like one, it should be equal to the other. The realization should be the same. It should be like a candle lighting another candle.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the early Buddhism coming to Tibet with Padmasambhava and Yeshe Sogyal originally was very radical and very non-monastic. And then later, the monastic traditions kind of co-opted it, and they institutionalized things more. And they had an anti-woman kind of bias. Like, there were sacred places in Tibet where later in Tibetan history it became like illegal for women to go there. And then there's like some ancient debates where like some of the masters are like, you can't tell women not to go here. Women are the Dakini. Women are enlightened too. Women have Buddha nature too. And so they would debate this. But the literal word for women in the Tibetan language is lower born.
Yeah.
And so that's also, unfortunately, a part of the tradition. And so this is part of the tradition that should change, right? We can change it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I heard that even to this day, like in traditional settings, like Pema Chodron is considered like junior to the most junior monk. Like that is the way that it's still set up institutionally. The highest master nun is junior to the most amateur. I mean, that is insane.
Yeah, that is insane. And unfortunately for those of us who love Buddhism, I believe that goes back to the historical Buddha Shakyamuni. I think some of those rules are from the original Buddha. And the reason for that, in my understanding, is Indian society was so stratified in that way.
Yeah.
And he was concerned that if they were too radical, that it wouldn't be accepted by the mainstream society. So he resisted having nuns at all for a long time.
Right.
And then eventually he said, okay, there can be nuns, but they have extra rules. They're a lower status. And he didn't want...
Shadow side of Buddhism.
It is a shadow side of Buddhism. But I can also understand how back then in 500 BC India, if you had a religious movement where women are running away from their homes to become a nun, that would be unacceptable
to
the social order.
It would disrupt the whole socio system. Because unfortunately, women were, they were controlled by their family, and their family would decide who they would marry, and the huge emphasis on women getting married and having children to continue the family. Right.
And so, but yeah, it doesn't make it right. It's interesting history.
It is. But that's also what's exciting about the tantric paths that started in India, is that it was this layperson path. It was, you can be married and you can have children and you can still have a really rich spiritual life.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be this either or. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to be an ascetic and renounce society necessarily. So there's many different paths.
Yeah, and that seems like so applicable to our situation today, right? Like most people that we're talking about, like who are spiritual, not religious, they're interested in meditation and yoga, but they don't want to become a monk or a nun. They don't want to not work or not handle money, things like that. Doesn't really fit with our culture.
Yeah.
And so again, like how can we find an awakened, compassionate manifestation of something like money? Something like all these meditation practices, like within our life situation as it is. I think it's possible. That being said, like if you want to go deep in meditation, it's probably good to like have a conducive environment. And certain professions might be more challenging than others, for example. Life circumstances do affect us, but in theory, Buddha nature is all pervasive. You can recognize it at any time.
Yeah. And as a layperson, doing a retreat a couple times a year, it's like most people plan vacation time anyways. I think it's pretty accessible for a lot of people to do some sort of retreat, maybe twice a year.
Yeah.
Of course it takes sacrifice like anything, but I think that that's really useful, to kind of just dive in deep, even if it's just a week of time, even just a couple days,
right?
To just kind of experience the difference that happens when you do fully dive into a meditative space for an extended period of time. I know, like, every time, but every time, even if it's really challenging during the retreat, for most of the retreat, like, I've always left and felt like more sensitive, and I've felt my nervous system more relaxed from it, and more aware and sensitive to very subtle energies, and just more aware in general.
Beautiful.
Like feeling more conscious of where I'm at, what I'm thinking, where someone else is, what's going on, and just this deeper stillness that I think our entire world would benefit from so much in this in this age of overstimulation and
overinformation,
anxiety. I mean,
so much stress and anxiety from the news.
This is just an anxiety-inducing time to be alive. Like, it's...
Yeah. Absolutely.
If we can't find that stillness.
It feels hard to just turn your phone off for, 12 hours or whatever when you're going to sleep. And,
airplane mode.
Yeah, airplane mode is good.
Airplane mode is good.
Now that I mention it, I don't remember the last time I actually turned the phone all the way off, because I use airplane mode too. But then it's like always kind of on.
That's a good point. Like, why don't we just turn it off if we're going to do airplane mode?
Yeah.
I'm going to start just turning it off. There's no reason.
There's no reason not to.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I heard someone call Facebook the other day trauma book. It's basically what it's become, right? Like, just looking at your trigger book, trauma book. Like, I mean, I feel like our generation has new challenges, even with just dealing with this level of accessibility to information and the overstimulation. Because it's like, with Facebook, it's not even like, oh, I'm going to this news source, or I'm going to that. It's like, look at your news feed, and you'll see 20 different articles, arguing 20 different opinions or theories on any said topic.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you find your sanity? How do you find your ground? How do you find what you believe in, or what you choose to even entertain or let into your field?
Yeah, and what like real benefit or good comes from trying to keep up with it all and read it all and respond to everything. And I mean, we have to start to take our attention back and make choices and not compulsively, trying to scan everything. It's hard though, because they're so addictive, these devices, these social media. But yeah, I think it seems like you're someone who went to Naropa and dove deep, the master's program of religious studies in yours, and you have your own practice. Like, it seems like it was a good experience for you.
It's been a powerful couple years. I mean, it wasn't easy. I would say I was more tested and confronted and challenged with my identity, my beliefs. It was a very emotional experience, actually, in a lot of ways, because I was learning so much. I really had never studied the Buddhist tradition in this way before. And it was very triggering, I guess, for me at first, actually, because it was really breaking down a lot of things that I was like, do I believe this? Is this real? And it was a good practice in understanding, like, with these teachings, it's not like you read the book once and you're like, got it, let me take the test. I mean, this is like you sit with these teachings your whole life, and your understanding of them develops. And you get flashes of insight, and then you're in confusion again, and you continue to go through these cycles.
Totally.
But I see it as a spiral that's ever deepening versus just a full samsaric wheel.
You're not returning to the same place, but you're
not
revisiting the same issues, the same questions, maybe.
With different levels of awareness and understanding each time.
Totally. That fits my experience too. And I think that question of self is, for me, a big example of that. Because like you said at the beginning of our conversation, like having a healthy sense of self in the psychological sense, that's so important.
Right.
And that's something that it's worth studying psychology, positive psychology, and people like Abraham Maslow to understand that too. Like, not just, because I think the no self can be like this big hammer that you use to knock, if you're using that to like knock yourself down all the time, that's not the point of it. The point is to like liberate your mind.
Right.
Not to diminish yourself or to and also not to avoid like, what's genuinely true for you. What do you genuinely want and need? And like, how can you take up space and have your voice be heard? And how can you make a positive impact? If you have a negative view of yourself that's hiding under this no self idea, it's going to be hard to function and live a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
So.
And it also makes sense that would have been such a big teaching in the first turning, like, ascetic environment where there wasn't a lot of relating, right? There wasn't a lot of, this is who I am, this is how I'm showing up in the world, this is how I present. I mean, it was a very internal, deconstructive experience that they were doing, so I can see the use in that. But to take those teachings and apply it to someone trying to have a career or an identity or a family or a relationship, like, you have to have an understanding of your needs and your desires and your identity and who you are and what you're offering. So it's tricky. You can't just like take one teaching out of a context and think it's gonna work in the same way in a different context. Yeah,
if your wife or partner's angry at you and yelling at you and you just say, oh, I have no self, they're not gonna work too well.
There's some I think, especially when I was studying some Zen, there's ways in which spiritual bypassing can absolutely happen in Buddhism. And you have to be really aware of that and not let that happen, because and that happens in other traditions too, and I don't see that as useful. It's not supposed to be a way to bypass life.
Yeah, I guess to argue the other side of that, it might be useful to like be able to take a break from your churning kind of monkey mind and then come back to a situation with fresh energy. But I agree, it's not meant to bypass what comes up for us. It's not meant to avoid things. So for people who are conflict avoidant, there's a maybe even bigger danger there. But maybe for people who are like very prone to conflict, maybe it'd be good for them to like pause for a moment. So it's again, It's like, what do you need? What's your growing edge rather than a one size fits all?
Totally. I mean, and again, I think it's always that both and approach too. Like even, seeing the mess of the world right now and just being like, oh, well, we're all going to die, or, nothing really matters,
like a fatalist kind of.
Or this is all manifestations of mind, and, just sort of coming from an absolute perspective in a way that's bypassing the relative pain and grief and themes that are going on. I think that's really what it is too. It's not about solely choosing a relative or absolute plane of existence, but actually integrating them in that both and approach of like, I recognize that both are true. And how do you sit with that? That is way harder, but I think that's really where it's at. The nuance and complexity of it's not about completely dismissing emotions or any like dense, finite, relative experience of reality solely for a transcendent experience, but it's also not dismissing the absolute transcendent experience. It's like, how can we actually understand both? How can we experience both?
Yeah.
And really, like, if we can experience both at the same time, I think that is the awakened mind. It's like you've actually penetrated through different states of consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the Bardo teachings are about. When they talk about like this lucid dreaming, the dream yoga, they talk about the clear light meditative absorption, they talk about all these different states of consciousness, and the goal is constantly to wake up to like the luminous emptiness nature of mind and recognize that, we think we're dreaming and then we're awake and then we're meditating and then we die, but actually it's all the same in the awakened state.
Wake up within your experience rather than outside of it or exiting it.
Yeah.
No, it was well said. I like that. Like, I think that's what Tantra is pointing to. I think that's what the third turning is pointing to. There are spiritual traditions and teachers who are teaching, and this is within Buddhism too, that ultimate reality is something, in a sense, separate, and like that everything we're experiencing is an illusion. And so seeing through that illusion, you get to the reality. And I think, again, this, I think they're both true. There's like a both and there. But I tend more towards what you're talking about, like being in our experience, not avoiding that. Letting it have its own reality in the moment, like letting, like, every thought, every emotion, every situation have a certain reality because it's happening. And finding emptiness, finding Buddha nature within that.
Yeah. I mean, Chogyam Trungpa talks about that sacred view, right? And how like waking up in the Vajrayana path is like, it's not necessarily like everything becomes like more of a delusion, but everything becomes more vivid and clear and sharp, and it's like scents and colors and shapes and everything. It's like, it's actually like more alive, and like more real in a certain way. But I love this understanding of luminous emptiness, because it's like, it's like understanding that nothing is static. And there is this level of like emptiness within everything, but that doesn't mean that it's not real. I mean, it just depends on how you're defining real.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I mean, it's all a dream and it's all real,
Yeah.
And
I just remembered something Sarah Harding said to me one time that relates. We were like talking about some of these same issues, and how if you just realize emptiness, like if you're just sitting and you realize your true nature, like that's enough. Like that's enough to awaken. And so I was asking her, like, why are there all these other practices? What's the point of all these yogic practices with like the breath and visualization and movement and or like consort practice with a partner? And she said, well, maybe that's true. Just realizing emptiness is enough. And maybe that's the Dharmakaya. And maybe if you want to embody the Nirmanakaya in this world, that's what these other practices are for. And I thought that was a really cool idea.
Yeah.
Bringing it more into manifestation, working through all these kinks in our karma.
Yeah. And I think depending on your karma too, some people can tap into that Dharmakaya, just through sitting meditation. And other people need to clear through karma and clear through energetic blockages with pranayama and with movement and with mantra. So again, it's not like this one size fits all. I think, certain people will have an affinity to the yogic practices, myself included in that category. And, I've found that, if I do some like powerful pranayama and I do some visualization and I move my body, then I can sit and I can tap into more of an empty mind way faster because I've kind of worked through all this energy.
Yeah. I've had that experience too. I think there's a lot of value in that.
And I mean, my understanding from studying the history of yoga is that was always the key. It's like all of these practices they were doing with their bodies and with their breath and with the visualizations and with the mantras was preparing them to have the most opportune, auspicious, meditative absorption experience.
Yeah.
I mean, even just like sitting with your spine straight, like in lotus position, like the more you tap into the bandhas and the chakras and the energetic channels and understand when is it clear and when is it not, like, and Reggie Ray teaches this in a really subtle body way, which I found so powerful, of just like very subtly recognizing like the root and like this powerful pillar, and like there's a reason why pretty much any tradition you talk to, even if you're sitting in a chair, like they're always like, whatever you do, just keep your spine straight.
Yeah, have
like,
that alignment.
That is more important than anything else. There is like an energetic alignment that actually sets you up for having a certain experience. That can't happen when you're hunched over or anything else. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. It's definitely like a big part of all the yoga traditions.
Yeah, I think it's more empowering than anything else, actually. And it's cool how we're kind of seeing this renaissance of breath work too, right? Like we're seeing all these breath work ceremonies and people are doing the Wim Hof method and people are starting to realize again that pranayama or whatever you want to call it is really powerful and, oxygenates our bodies so powerfully, and we can actually like clear our minds and clear dense energy so quickly. Just from doing pranayama. We don't have to take a pill. We don't have to smoke anything. Like, we can alter our state of consciousness through breath.
Yeah, absolutely.
And regulate our nervous system.
Yeah.
And everything else.
Yeah, and the breath work developed by Stan Grof, holotropic breath work, induces a altered state, and I've done that, and the breath is so powerful. A lot of Tibetan yoga practices, or Vajrayana, are about bringing the breath down to the lower belly and kind of keeping it there and like holding the breath, rather than like the breath of fire or the holotropic where you're kind of breathing faster. So there's definitely some differences, but for sure it changes your state of consciousness. I mean, if you take a deep breath in, that's why we say that, take a deep breath. Right there calms your nervous system. If you take a deep breath in and hold it for a moment, I can do that even more if you can relax with it, if you can relax with the holding. Well, it's been great having you on the podcast. This is a really rich conversation.
Yeah.
It's fun to talk about all this stuff. Any last words you have?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would just say, like, speaking to my own experience, I'm also a body worker and spend a lot of time working in that dense, finite realm, right? Like manipulating bodies, and working with breath. And it's fascinating to abide in that plane and also continue to recognize and see everything as luminous emptiness, and kind of see through things, but not in a bypassing way. It's like to believe that and still see the power and importance of giving a deep tissue massage, and so I think more than anything else that I got out of my time at Naropa was really this introduction and celebration of the both and mentality, which is really that celebration of being able to abide in complexity and hold nuance and hold multiple perspectives as once and embody your body and celebrate your humanness and also find ways to tap into stillness and out of your identity and ego and find more transcendence and bring it all into this life.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's something we all need more of, being with paradox, being with the unknown.
And sitting in uncertainty, and sitting in discomfort.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good note to end on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have found this podcast valuable, there are many ways in which you can support it. You can share it with friends and on your social media. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/astateofmind. For show notes and more information unique to each episode, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit julianocean.us. And please don't hesitate to send me a message or email and let me know what you think and contribute to our conversation. Thank you so much for your support. It is listeners like you that make all this so very much worthwhile.